Hey everybody, we need to talk about the Warhammer 40,000 Leviathan tournament doc and why I think it's important. This document is an absolute treasure for two reasons. One, this is the first time in quite some time that a Warhammer publication meant for organized and competitive play has not done extensive modifications to the core game. Now, is that going to continue? I don't know. But so far, with this first document, I had my expectations completely subverted of what was going to happen. Historically speaking, over 9 editions of Warhammer, be it Warhammer 40,000, Warhammer Age of Sigmar, almost any version of Warhammer, either the fans or Games Workshop themselves have taken the game and split it into two camps. There's the way the game is when you first get your hands on it, kind of the out-of-the-box experience. People have lots of names for that over the years. There's Black Book 2nd edition 40k with the Codex Imperialis. There was Index 8th edition where it was just indexes. And it ends up transforming over time through the release of codexes into something different, into what I would say is the camp of the way that the product says that you're supposed to play with it, and then the real way that you play with it, the competitive way you play with it. And there's a reason for that. Organized play is a very simple process by which there is a unspoken, predetermined agreement onto how strangers play Warhammer against each other. That means that you have what's called full-size games of 40k. Someone said that on a video I made this week. Why aren't you guys playing full-size games of 40k? Well, what is full-size games of 40k? It's the size of game of Warhammer 40,000 that you expect you are supposed to play because it's the real size. And over the last 35 years, the game has transformed almost inevitably from the launch of an edition of the game, or the launch of the game itself, into those two camps. People who are kind of blissfully unaware of that, I would call them the basement 40k players, or the people that don't interact with the game itself that much or that often. They might play once or twice a year, but they collect and paint miniatures. And then those who play in game stores quite regularly, and people who play in tournaments. And there's sort of a collective agreement that you are always training to play a very serious competitive game of Warhammer 40,000. So my expectation when I was given a cool advanced look at this Grand Tournament pack was that there was going to be the sort of like the real deal here. We were going to see what was in the box. This was the way that people were going to play and interact with the game when they first got Leviathan. And then this was going to be the way that people actually talked about playing. And there was a bit of like expectation around that. I watched people talk about it on the internet. Well, we'll see what happens when the chapter approved comes, and the first FAQ comes, and the first balanced data slate comes. Because, like it or not, that was a thing in the last few editions of Warhammer 40,000. The community drove it. There was meta watch articles. There was talking about like tweaking the points and adjusting things. And that may still happen down the road. But ultimately, every 6 months, you received a new publication called Chapter Approved for that specific game that changed the fundamental things the game was played for and how the game was played. It created that idea that there was a full-size game and a not real way of playing the game. I was a big proponent in 9th edition of playing incursion level games, which are 1,000-point games, simply because they resolved quicker, there was less stuff to actually maintain and know on the battlefield, and they were a lot less mentally taxing, and so I enjoyed them more. And I got a lot of questions about why am I not playing real games of Warhammer 40,000? And so what was very interesting when I got this document, and I'm going to give you the highlights, was that the core box set is how you play the game. This document is not what I was expecting it to be, which was a chapter-approved document saying, well, here's the actual scenarios you should play, and here's the actual army construction rules we're going to follow. Warhammer 40,000 Leviathan has done a really hard 180-degree pivot away from army construction rules, opening the doors to, we got to have a hero to lead your army, but you can take any other units you want as long as you don't have any 3 of any given type, unless they are commonplace troops like battle line and dedicated transports. That was something that existed early on in 8th edition 40,000, which I really enjoyed. And it means that you had a lot more agency as a hobbyist to build and paint the models you like and use them on the battlefield. Now, will they be good or not? That is hotly debated, of course. And the overall, I guess, efforts put into creating and updating 2,400 plus data slates to make that game, I guess, updated to the new edition. That was a big process, and I don't think that those data slates will survive contact with the community for more than a few months before certain interactions, of course, are pointed out and fixed. They're already happening since the release of the free PDFs. But my expectations were completely subverted when I read this document. Because what this document says is, when you play tournaments, and when we run tournaments of Warhammer 40,000, you will use the rules in the book. You will use the Leviathan card deck and the mustering rules from the rulebook. And I was completely shocked by that. I thought for sure there was going to be some sort of like cloak and dagger Illuminati pulling back of the curtain, and here's the actual army construction rules, and here's how we're going to change the game to be more restrictive and more fine-tuned and more, air quotes, massive, huge air quotes, balanced. As much balance as you can find in a 2,400 plus individual piece tabletop game that uses dice. So that was thing the first. I was surprised and delighted by the fact that they basically held true to the design vision in the Leviathan rulebook. Now the second thing, which I thought was neat, was they put some advice to organizers in there. This document is much more about educating a person who might want to run a tournament and giving insight into the thought behind the tournaments the Games Workshop themselves will be running, than it is a prescriptive set of rules for doing things. It gives advice for everything from table layouts, but then specifically says, but don't make them exactly like this, because if you do, you're just giving your players the ability to like predetermine their deployments and predetermine their measurements and know exactly how they're going to play their first turn. And that's bad. There should be a little chaos in that, so don't precisely do these things. As well as offering up basically 15 different combinations of scenario cards from Leviathan that pair really well to give you a mission pool. Like, use the cards from Leviathan. Here's some cool pairings of mission pools, but ultimately do whatever you want and pair them up however you want. It also gives a few little like erratas to certain mission cards just to make sure that they're clear over the course of how you play the game in a tournament, in a competitive setting. And then also some guidance for things like objective markers where you can move over top of them in order to remove the idea that you can block charges or create some kind of immovable obstacle during the game that players could then gamify or use to their advantage. All great advice, but all couched in the language of, but you're the tournament organizer, so do what you want. Here's what we're going to do, and here's the thinking behind it, but go ahead and do what you want. And boy, howdy, people will. But, and here's a very strong but, if the global events team at Games Workshop is really serious about their sort of championship program and organizing what would be the, I guess, put up in lights format of playing their game, there's going to be a downforce put on independent tournaments to adopt these rules, because you don't want to play in multiple different formats if you're trying to get to the grand championship. You want every game that you play, from those people playing in the game store, like every game they're going to play is going to be at the Olympics of Warhammer, all the way up into the 500s, basically at Warhammer World or Warhammer Fest, wherever it ends up being for global events. That the expectation is that you're probably going to play roughly close to the way that this grand tournament document says. Now, the second thing is, this is going to be for at least a year. They're not going to change this up because they want to use these rules all the way through until the next championship gets crowned in this edition, which I think is really exciting. I am real sick of like having to have whiplash every time a new version of how you are supposed to play a Warhammer game comes out. And I like the idea that the expectation I have when I settle into a game 6 months from now, it's going to be pretty much the same as it is today. That is incredibly refreshing. And so that's thing number two. So the army construction rules surprised the hell out of me. The language and the fact that the mission pack is just use the rule book completely surprised me. But we're going to get to the grand finale. And the grand finale is the final page of this document, the afterword. And that is, what is the point of a Warhammer tournament? I've never heard this better spelled out, I think, than in this last paragraph. The writing in this is impeccable. And I think the intention and spirit behind the Warhammer tournament, goals for the participants is pretty clearly outlined here. Because there's two camps. There's Games Workshop as a company that produces miniatures. Of course, they want you to buy those miniatures. They want to make miniatures good so that you buy them. They want to give you an interesting gameplay experience so that once you finish consuming, building, painting, and collecting an army, you want to go do it again to have a different, unique experience with their product lines. It's how they stay in business. No one gets paid when you play a miniature war game. They get paid when you buy the miniatures, paints, brushes, and scenery to play a miniature war game. Doesn't matter what company you're rooting for or what game you like or what your current hyperfixation is, nobody's making a dime off you putting models on a table and playing with them. They're making their money off of the actual physical assets themselves. But the goal in this document is to outline the best practices for people having a good time. And that's the first statement. And I really liked this line right here. Before you roll a single dice against an opponent to start your tournament experience, remember 2 things. Number 1, the person across the table from you shares your level of Warhammer. And number 2, by the time the dust settles on the event, everyone will have lost a game, typically more than one. Only 1 or 2 people will manage to leave the event without a loss. That is such a powerful piece of learning. It's about creating empathy and player contracts in between the 2 people standing across from each other on the table. Every miniature wargame could use that if you're going to do an organized play pack. More understanding of the person across from you. They even get into it when they talk about their pairing system and why they want to use a version of strength of schedule versus using victory points for pairing, as victory points doesn't necessarily dictate how the game went. Whether or not one person's checked out because they had an early loss, they don't think they can win the tournament anymore, and so they gave up a win against somebody who crushed their first opponent. There is a ton of really good wisdom in here. And the sort of like afterword outlining the fact that first and foremost, it's not about celebrating the ultimate victor. Someone who goes undefeated and wins the best general needs very little acclaim beyond the outcome itself. After all, they won. Instead, it's the experience of every single attendee that truly matters, and the recognition that, for the most part, people who attend a tournament, community, and friendship are both the purpose and the outcome. That's incredibly important, I think, for any person that plays tabletop games competitively to hear, and I love that it's enshrined in this document. So, yeah, I didn't think I'd be making a video about this. This is a PDF that I was going to probably just gloss over until I actually got to talk to the designers about it and read through it and get my sort of like advanced look at it. I'm incredibly impressed by this document. And I'm impressed, 1, because it holds consistent to the product they're developing. So if someone goes into a Games Workshop store, independent retailer, wherever, and buys a copy of the new Warhammer 40,000, if they go to a tournament, they're gonna have a fairly consistent experience all the way through. And 2, the spirit and language in this document is incredibly educational. Now, does that mean that the outcome is that? Does that mean that the community at large playing Warhammer 40,000 adopts this? Maybe. I don't know. No plan survives contact with the enemy. Or as Mike Tyson says, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. But that's a outcome, I think, based upon us as a community. So I wanted to make a video about this because I think that the messaging at the end of this document is really important. And as a person who likes to run tournaments, I run a quarterly tournament for Infinity. And I've given talks where language very much like this happens at the beginning of every event about communication and sportsmanship and the player contract, the social contract that goes into gaming. This feels like an incredibly healthy way to approach turning the page on a game system and trying to promote a new way of looking at the organized play and organized events. We'll see how that goes, because I would like for there not to be 2 versions of all of Games Workshop's games. The way that's written in the book and the way that the loudest voices probably online and in the competitive wargaming community think the game should be played. Now, sometimes that means that a portion of competitive players will run off another direction and create an independent tournament circuit, right? The ITC was, I think, out of that because for a long time Games Workshop didn't really run competitive events. We'll see how many people get on board and start to adopt this kind of stuff, and whether or not it becomes the mainstream, that playing the game out of the rulebook, using the rulebook rules is the mainstream, or whether it becomes a patchwork sort of Frankenstein, as Games Workshop games have historically done over time. So I can't tell the future. I don't know what's going to happen, but I did say at the beginning of this whole thing about Warhammer 40,000 having a new edition that I was going to give this old flame another chance. And so far, it seems like their intentions are good, and at the very least, they're holding to a singular vision. We'll see how that goes and how long that lasts. So anyway, big thanks for Games Workshop. Let me have access to that early. And for you guys for watching, thanks on Ash. Hey there, I hope you enjoyed that video. There are tons of other games already recorded for you to watch. Click over to my channel page if you haven't already, and have a look through the dozens of playlists full of videos. I guarantee you'll discover a game you haven't seen played before. I put out new videos 7 days a week, and every day is themed to a different genre as I continue to explore the wider world of gaming. Of course, none of that's possible without you, the viewer, so click a like and subscribe if you'd like to stay on top of what's happening here daily. My 2 kids and I are massively grateful to be able to have the flexibility of this job so I can always maximize my time with them. If you want to support me continuing to put out this content, it's only possible because of my amazing backers on Patreon who support the studio, equipment, and model cost, as well as being how I make the bulk of my living. You can also help out by buying a t-shirt through Spreadshirt, a measuring gauge or widget from Deathford Designs, or buying one of my games and supplements like Last Days, Gamma Wolves, and Blaster. As a way of showing my appreciation, patrons get early access to new games and supplements that I write throughout the course of the year. Huge thanks for watching, it really does help out, and happy gaming.